Hi, friends. This reflection is for the fourth Sunday of Ordinary Time. Now, if you may notice, there is a pattern that we're going to be experiencing because, believe it or not, we're going to see this whole feasting turn into fasting. And for this Sunday in particular, for the fourth Sunday, we hear the passage of the Beatitudes. Now, very often we hear the same passage on All Saints' Day, which never changes, by the way. So, what are the Beatitudes? But before we get there, I just wanted to point out something. If you ever noticed, Matthew talks about, and his audience was to the Jews. And Moses will go to Mount Sinai and receive the first tablet. See what I did there? In that tablet were God's laws. And at the time he received them, the Israelites were trying to do everything that they wanted to, but they did one thing that made God angry. And that was not putting him at the center. 10 Commandments changed everything. It was a game changer. And it was on that mountain Moses received God's law. We fast forward into the New Testament, particularly in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus goes up a mountain, not to receive God's law, but to preach it. In the Gospel of Matthew, he dedicates 3 chapters about the Sermon on the Mount, in which Jesus proclaims the teachings of God, about loving our enemies, loving our friends, whatever the deal is. And bear in mind, too, this is just after he was fasting in the desert for 40 days. And he began to preach. He went town to town, and he got to the point where crowds are following him, and he decided, let's go up. I'm going to go up the mountain and preach there. Because you see, if you ever noticed, Lord God is on high, and we're down here. Now, one of the most notable things that Jesus preached about in the Sermon on the Mount are the Beatitudes. There are 8 of them that were given to us. And one way or another, the saints of the church were even called to emulate those Beatitudes if they wanted to follow Christ. Pope Benedict XVI puts it well about the Beatitudes when he said, the Beatitudes express the meaning of discipleship. What the Beatitudes mean cannot be expressed in purely theoretical terms. It is proclaimed in the life and suffering and in the mysterious joy of the disciple who gives himself over completely to following the Lord. What the Beatitudes demonstrate, it chooses the fact that Jesus chooses the weak to triumph over the strong. In our readings for this Sunday, we hear, first of all, we hear about from the prophet Zephaniah, all you humble on earth, which points us to the first beatitude, which is blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, it's not talking about money. It's not talking about, if you're in the low class, middle class, high class, whatever the case is. But rather, it talks about humility. St. Augustine said time and time again that the most important virtue is humility. Without humility, we cannot defeat the pride that is in our lives, or the pride that's keeping us from striving for greatness. In Psalm 146, we hear about the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. in which the Lord secures justice for the oppressed, sets captives free, loves the just, protects strangers. The fatherless and the widow the Lord sustains. He thwarts the wicked. The Lord shall reign forever. Even in St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, he calls everyone to their own calling. And our calling begins in baptism. Now, of course, we were babies at the time, right? But as we grow, we begin to realize, God may have something for me. He's going to whisper it to you in the silence of your heart. St. Paul writes that he chose the foolish to shame the wise. He chose the weak to shame the strong. He chose the lowly and despised of the world, those who count for nothing, to reduce to nothing. That's how you can articulate what humility is all about. It's all about being humble. As a matter of fact, the English word for humble derives from the Latin for earth. If we cannot be humble, then we will never know how to follow God. You see, God is supposed to ground us. He calls us to walk humbly with him, as the prophet Micah reminds us. Seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with him. These 8 Beatitudes tells us this is the way. This is the way for us to follow him. St. Pier Gino Frassati, who was just canonized, I won't say beatified, was canonized last year, one of the first saints canonized by Pope Leo XIV. He lived out the Beatitudes. And he's also known for saying to the heights. That is our job in life. But the first thing we must do is that we must be humble. We must humble our hearts, everything. As St. John the Baptist said, he must increase, I must decrease. That is the call for us to humility. So friends, are we ready to humble our hearts, be of the ground, to follow God as he is preaching his word? Because on that mountain, he gives us his word for us to preach as we bring about his kingdom on earth now. Today is another reminder that sainthood can be achieved by anybody. It's not just priests and religious, but also the laity. The good news is we are seeing a wave of causes for canonization among some laity. And of course, some from my generation, believe it or not, which is exciting to see. But at the same time, we got a lot of work to do. So how should you start becoming a saint? Well, first of all, you have the commandments. Secondly, you have the Beatitudes. Let's walk humbly with Christ. He will lead us to greatness. God bless.